Welcome everybody to NASCAD Artwork Alumni Talks. Each month, I'm joined by two alum, and our community is a global one, but our talks and by extension, sorry, our school and by extension, our talks are hosted in Chubuktuk in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. We're honored to gather, speak, and make artwork here. My name is Molly Cronin, and I have the wonderful opportunity to speak with our alum every month to find out where their careers or practices have taken them since their days at NASCAD. And this month, I'm very excited to be joined by Pedro Loredo, Design 2023, and Gary Markle, MFA 1995, to talk about fashion design and the intersections of health and access. So, Pedro, Gary, thanks so much for joining us today. Pedro, could you give us a little introduction and tell us a bit about where you're based and what you're working on currently?
Yes, for sure. I'm currently based in Halifax, but I'm originally from Mexico
Mhm.
City. And I came here to do my master's in NASCAD. And since I graduated 2023, I've been taking on like different projects, mostly graphic. But the thing that has uh, got me crazy right now. It's my research about smart textiles and emotional regulation, which is the topic I approached in my thesis. So yeah, like this ongoing research has led me to different accelerators, and it's been great because I connected with a lot of people from different fields, especially science fields, which we don't get to interact a lot. So yes, right now that this is where I'm at, and hopefully gets somewhere interesting in the future.
Okay, wonderful. We're going to talk lots about the process of collaboration and like how you've come to work on these projects. So I'm excited to hear lots more. Thanks, Pedro. Gary, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, where you are, what you're working on as a quick
Sure.
introduction?
Yeah, I am a person who studied both textiles and fashion, and then came to NASCAD and focused on sort of expanded fashion. We didn't really have a name for it back then, and it was probably would it be called now like relational aesthetics. We didn't
Mm.
know that word yet. And so kind of finding ways to communicate through clothing and textiles. And from that, then that was my MFA at NASCAD. And then I just basically, you know, a career concocted as it happens in Halifax, where, with many things. But eventually I found my way to a full-time position at NASCAD. And that's where I really got to, I think, hone all of these thoughts.
Mm.
And it's such a ripe petri dish for, just interactions and collectivity and just the blessing, to use a a word, of being around students most of my life, and really interesting colleagues as well. And so from that, I entered into what we now, I think still call like expanded fashion. So
Mm.
I technically don't really make any garments, but I'm exploring second skin and ideas of that, and also how narratives are created through what we wear and how we dress and how we present ourselves. And the kind of semiotics of that, but also into the idea of more than human worlds. So
Mhm.
I'm currently pursuing a doctoral degree at Aalto University in Finland, and the thesis topic is, do we make craft, or does craft make us? So sort of a riddle, if you will, but it's really fun. Yeah, and that's where I
Well,
find myself today.
very busy. I love to hear it. Thanks, Gary. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about sort of like your time at NASCAD as a instructor and how that has informed your practice. Can you take us back in time a little bit as well and tell us what it was like to do an MFA at NASCAD and how that kind of shaped what you do now?
Okay, so to do that, I want to go all the way back to New York City, where I had just I got my BFA in 89, no, 88, and I knew before I even graduated, I was like, I will never ever really work in this city. I love New York. It was an amazing experience, but I really did not like the industry in that city, the fashion industry. So I had friends going to NASCAD, and in those days, NASCAD had an apartment in Chinatown in New York, and I every time
people would be in town, I would go visit them and hang out. And it was just like, who are these instructors and what is this thing they're up to? And it was, I just thought, oh my God. And my friends were evolving, like from high school, these art high school, these people were evolving, not just as artists, but as people in such a beautiful way. And I got to meet some of the instructors and so on. And so I got it in my head, okay, the way to correct this whole experience is to go to Nova Scotia, go to NASCAD and get a master's degree. And so when doing the master's in those days, I mean, the school was it was tiny. It was just the Morse T building and the Granville campus,
Mhm.
and so it was very contained and right sized, and it was it's weird because aesthetically it's the same. Like I work within very much the same architecture that I did my master's in, but it was a very eye-opening and very small group of people, like in terms of the cohort and the MFA. And um, it was definitely the beginning of a healing process from correcting sort of all of this overly designed based education and coming back to this sort of like, who am I? Uh, I didn't even have to really worry about defining myself as a craftsperson or a designer or an artist. Like we really were breaking through those kind of rigid silos back then.
Mhm.
So it really helped me to gain confidence in my ability to navigate in between fields and worlds and so on.
Yeah, and I think the interdisciplinary nature of NASCAD's education is like a recurring theme that I hear throughout these talks and something that is like worth celebrating and acknowledging because I think a lot of people had a similar experience to you that
Yeah.
yeah, doing away with these labels often is like a much more expansive way to have an art education. So
And I'll
um
talk to that just a bit more, and
sure.
I'll get off it. But for example, I came in as a textile student. I made video and performance. That was what I did. So yeah.
A little bit. Thanks, Gary. Pedro, you also came from a large metropolitan city to do a master's degree at NASCAD, albeit much more recently. Can you tell us a bit about what your master's was like here, who you were working with, or the kinds of things you were interested in exploring?
Yes, so well, it was definitely intense my time at NASCAD.
Yeah.
And not just because like you know what we did, but the time I started my degree. So it was 2019. I got my acceptance letter, and right away COVID hit. So I had a lot of people telling me, "Is this the right decision? Are you sure?" Like, and you know what? I was like, maybe this is not gonna happen, or I'm not gonna have the energy, or I don't know, later. So I'm gonna do it. And I started part-time back in Mexico. It actually made the master's very interesting because a lot of the topics, especially theoretical, um, were focused on something happening here in Halifax, but then we had the opportunity to extrapolate it to what's going on in our cities. We had people in China, Mexico, all over the world, I remember. And the teachers obviously were here. So 2020, end of 2020, I decided to come finally to Halifax. And yeah, it was life changing. I had the opportunity to work with Angela Henderson. She was one of the professors that actually touched me the most because of her activist approach to everything. Then I worked with Michael LeBlanc, who was actually my supervisor for my thesis. And well, for those who don't know Michael, he has an expertise in electrical engineering. So when I was trying to find out what was that I wanted to do at this time with my career and my research, I encountered a professor and a methodology. The professor was the former NASCAR president, Ifa McNamara. She was my teacher for, I think, a semester, but she introduced me to this new method called autoethnography. And for me, that was super revealing, super life-changing because it was designing through your lived experience, which often, especially in my education in my undergrad in Mexico, you were told you could not be the parameter for anything you designed or created. So for me, that was like, okay, so these people actually have the same microchip I have in mind. So maybe I can try do something that is actually integrated and interdisciplinary.
Mhm.
So I was like, what can I do that I have the resources here? Textiles. So I was, you know what? I'm gonna go meet the textiles person that at that time Gary wasn't in NASCAR. I think he was like in Europe. So I connected with Anke Fox, the technician in the textiles workshop. And from there on, like all started working on. Um and yeah, I would say it was kind of different because first of all, nobody understood why I was wanting to bring textiles into a design degree. Um, but it all worked out. Very happy how it turned out. And getting to know that methodology really like sparked the beginning of what it was my journey in NASCAR. It continues to.
That's very exciting. And it sounds like Gary, like the kind of interdisciplinary nature of NASCAD's education was like significant to how you navigated your MFA. Like it expanded kind of maybe, yeah, the scope of the design projects.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, actually, it was Master of Design. Yeah.
of course. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Sorry, not MFA, Master of Design.
Yeah.
Um, well, this is great. This may be a good segue to talk a bit about with both of you about some of the what uh the intersections of like care and access and the body that we're talking about today specifically. So maybe Gary, I'll turn to you now. So can you tell us a bit about um, some of your work, some of your projects, and how fashion design and health and access kind of intersect for you in your practice?
Yeah. So for me, I think I'd early on been introduced to the idea of, clothing as second skin, right? And Pedro and I actually were rapping about this or talking about this, and I can't even remember when, like, I don't know how early that was. Might be in high school. It might have been my Connie Jeffress, my textiles teacher there, or it came to me, or it was, but anyhow, the point being, it's an accepted thought. And so clothing can be both, actually protective against, say, the environment, but clothing can also be protective in terms of psyche, right? So there's a sort of, and it's almost to the level of it magical, right? And also, as Neoko Furu, who was one of my teachers at NASCAD, said, we're born in the immediate connection after the tissue of our mother is cloth, right? We're swaddled in cloth, or we're cleaned with cloth, and that begins our relationship in the external world. And so it's, weighted with all of those things, significances and so on. And health and cloth are you know, intrinsically connected on micro and macro levels, because you can think of bandages, but you can also think now we have technologies that actually put micro weavings into bodies to build bone tissue on, for example. So that being said, my immediate experience came from having to be a care provider for my mother who had Alzheimer's, and so I began co-designing with her garments and systems for putting clothing on that allowed her increase to maintain or increase her level of autonomy in dressing as she progressed into this retrogenesis, so losing the ability. And like things would happen that we would still be able to laugh about, but sometimes she would come to breakfast with her underpants on the outside of her pants. So we would call it the Wonder Woman look, and we'd go back upstairs and reorient everything. But it was from that, I then was asked to write a grant for, Canadian, I think it was Canadian Institute of Health Research. If
Mhm.
I don't know if I have the acronym right, but and it was successful. It was accepted, and it was about exploring clothing as a means to helping people feel more, more agency as they were losing faculty, and and how that might have a positive impact on their psyche. And what was interesting there was it was accepted and it was funded, but it was not ambitious in terms of what the outcomes were. It was more about the research into it. But through this serendipity, I ran into people who, again, as Pedro was sort of saying, had the language and they knew about methodologies that were just being introduced in terms of co-design.
Mhm.
And so it launched into this larger project of worn well. Did I get that right? I always get that reversed. Is it well worn or worn? Well worn. I think it is well worn. That's my
Oh, wow.
dyslexia. Worn well?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had to
Yeah,
look at my notes.
yeah. An English professor friend of mine made me reverse it to that one,
Okay.
because they were like, no, that's a stronger thought, and I think it is. But
Yeah.
so that became this sort of semi-longitudinal. Like, I mean, it lasted over a year. I think we had 12 participants. They were all exceptional people from Lunenburg, that we
Mhm.
focused on a space and a type of person who were very independent and really looking forward to that, but were experiencing some difficulty physically. So rather than cognitively, we focused on physical constraints around their ability to dress. And then we tried to, working with them, we tried to create prototype garments that allowed them to minimize the sort of negative aspects of whatever it was around dressing. So it could be locked shoulders or, uh, other issues like incontinence and so on. And we were looking at, the most stylish garments we could actually come up with. So it was a very interesting um, experience and project. And I think that led then into other areas of sort of more like then I based on that I got contacted from a Dalhousie student who was doing a research in motion project that they have to do, and his was on the hospital gown
Mm.
and the horror of that garment. And we did a lot of in that case we did uh, um, control, or what they call it's a thing that's done with when a new product is being launched, but
Mhm.
we turned it into these kind of workshops where many stakeholders gave information. So patients, practitioners, caregivers, and so on. And then we did a rapid charrette process of prototyping in different sort of workshop um, environments with Dalhousie medical students, NASCAD design students, and others in the room together, and just came up with, you know, three different prototypes, I think. And then that did go forward. My interest was not clearly in marketing it. And so I sort of bowed out. And then another project came up, which was to research with Dal medical students into a new fiber that would have been used or could be used, and it's still probably under investigation, that basically would be used in medical situations that could be made on site um, to address things like burn victims and so on. So highly, what would the word be, like very sterile, very immediate, and very inexpensive to produce. And then it simply would return to liquid when it was not needed. So this would be, an interesting thing. It would be, it'd have to be liquefied and then dispensed of. But and then that happened right as COVID hit. So the government allowed us to pivot into protective wear, like personal protective devices.
Yeah.
So that's how I connected to health, if that helps at all.
It does, yeah, because it touches on a lot of different ways that like garments and the body interact with like, yeah, healing, change in mobility, aging. There's like a lot to discuss there that I think we'll kind of get into as the talk goes on.
Mhm.
So yeah, thank you, Gary. We'll turn to Pedro now and ask the same question. Can you tell us a little bit about where your work intersects with the body and access and health and sort of what compelled you to begin this project?
Yes. So I've always had a passion for fashion, but it's been like a weird relationship because I don't completely like the environment, the marketing environment, and how hostile and how it can get. So most of the times when I explored fashion, it was just to kind of cheer up myself. Even in school, it wasn't something we were allowed to explore, even though we were pushed to explore textiles as a valid design form. And actually, I learned most of what I know from design from textiles, structuring, like color, all basic design elements. So I graduate from my undergrad, and then I start working in marketing agencies, event marketing. Um, and that's when I sort of, like same as Gary, discovered fashion is not just sometimes the piece of clothing, it could be everything around it too. So for me, it's like the experience, the emotion. So that was encompassed in an event, right? So I was okay, I'm gonna stay here for some time until I decide what to do. And then I decided to come to NASCAD. Um, and again, it was Aoife who, who pushed me to reconcile with fashion. Um, and I did. And initially, what I wanted to do was to pay back to the trans community worldwide because I think we have an enormous debt with them, like in all senses. And I thought, what can I do, or what's in my hands that I can contribute to that? And I thought immediately of accessible like garments or clothing or undergarments. Like I started exploring there. However, and you might know for the time constraints of like delivering a thesis in NASCAN, yeah, 3 months wasn't enough to co-design something like that. And so I had to pivot from that. And that's when autoethnography really became my methodology. So at that point in time, I was struggling a lot with exhaustion, trouble focusing, depression, anxiety, you name it. I think we all went through it like as students. Some of us have it more, some of us show it differently. But while doing all this research, I found that it all conveyed in emotion, right? What I was trying to show or design around was how we deal with emotion and how we regulate emotions. And then I found that there was a lot of undone things for people who's neurodivergent, especially in fashion. So I started exploring there, and my initial idea was, what if the other person knew how I was feeling? Would that improve our conversation? Would that make it more fruitful for the other person and for me? And I was for sure, like just a little thing, like, a light, a vibration, something that indicate that maybe this is not the right time to talk to me or approach to me, and vice versa. And that's when I started exploring. And actually, that's what it ended up my thesis about. Um, I I started exploring electrical circuits as part of like mandatory classes we had,
Mhm.
and I found it so interesting how there was people including that in fashion and making essentially robots, wearable robots. But again, it all ended up in something like what we want to get away sometimes, or at least me, something decorative or purely artistic that cannot go away from where we hold art. And that's when the idea was born. Like I just was like, you know what? I know how to weave. I'm gonna try to intersect something. I'm gonna try to see if I can put any electricity and sensors in this piece of weaving. And it worked. it worked, and essentially what the textile does, it detects data. It's called EDA, electrodermal activity, and that's tightly connected to our emotional arousal. Say that when you're aroused, your sweat glands get activated, and what the sensor does, it's like it measures the how conductive you are, right? By the amount of sweat you're producing. So in a way, it was the most immediate tool I found to map emotion outside your mind or with the tools that are already in. And yeah, like that, I think that's how I intersected it. And I also think we have to remember that, as Gary was saying, fashion, technology, and health are silos that are in place for interest of whoever are running each discipline or industry.
Mm-hmm.
But fashion is one of our first technologies. So we have to remember that it's still technology. And I think people often immediately think of technology of something alienish out of this world screens. Like it could be that, but we have to also look back at what we have to build something. So yes, I think it's always been connected from my perspective.
I love that. I think it makes a lot of sense because neurodivergence and clothing and fashion are so connected, from sensory issues to kind of like the idea of having a safe piece of clothing that you maybe wear routinely for someone who's like on the autism spectrum, for example. But yeah, they and also the ability to communicate moments where like you are experiencing uh something that you want to be able to communicate. And I think the idea of doing that through clothing is so interesting. So I want to hear a little bit more maybe about like the function of them a bit, just so we can get a visual. Like let's say you and I are in a conversation and my garment, my electronic, the electronics of my garment pick up something on me. What do you see as someone who's talking to me? What does it look like when um, my emotions are being registered by the electronics?
Well, right now, um, it would be just a light because
Okay.
yes, I'm just in the process of like these accelerators, like DAO Innovates, Idea Hub. Like I'm working with them to come up with a real prototype, like a piece of garment. Right now, I just have a textile itself, like a square connected to cables and the breadboard and the microchip. Um, but yeah, let's say you're wearing that into whatever you want to give the form, a hoodie, scarf, or whatever. And the textile itself has the sensors woven in the structure. So you don't see any sensor. It's just the fabric itself that senses you. So you and I will be talking, you get stressed, let's say, and your levels go above. So if your levels go above your EDA levels, then red light will light up, indicating like, listen, you're going above, you gotta do something. In the future, when I have this, instead of being the red light, it could be a push notification to your phone or the same light or a vibration or something that helps you ground or be aware that you're going out of your safe emotional zone, right?
Mhm.
But that's where co-design plays a big role because these grounding techniques may vary from patient to patient. For someone who might be um, useful vibration for grounding, for the other one might be triggered, for example.
Yes.
So the goal is to make these the more accessible and customizable you can.
That's great. And I think that's Gary, you were talking about sort of these various people you work with. And similar to you, Pedro, it sounds like these can't be one fit all garments. They when we're talking about access, we're kind of always talking about, or we're often talking about individuals, and we're talking about personalization, because access isn't sort of like blanket in this way, and health isn't blanket in this way. So I'd love to talk a bit more about the collaboration process of these projects. And Gary, you've talked about working with both people in the sciences at Dalhousie and with community members and your own mother at, in Lunenburg.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the different styles of collaboration that go into these projects, and kind of what is generated out of the different people that you're working with?
Sure, I can that's a really great question, by the way.
Thanks.
And a good place to like we're sort of midway in the hour, and it's like,
Yeah.
wow. Because probably that aspect of the like what I learned about collaboration, and I think this relates to what Pedro was saying about how, if like it's so weird because if you can't come from design thinking where you can never be the Pedro, what was that what term you had for that they told you could never be the uh calibration or something for design, or that
Parameter, yeah,
parameter, thank you.
yeah.
um so you kind of have this thing where there's also, like, from fashion, there's this opposite thing that happens where you're the only thing. It's like all ego, and you're projecting yourself onto other people all the time, and it's like your vision, and you have all these people working with you to create it. And it's just recently that those people are even getting credit, because mostly it's just one person's name on someone's bum, if it's designer jeans, right? So so what I found, though, was like that never did appeal to me. uh, so I kind of went away from it. And then I guess slowly over time, after my master's and so on, even during that, but particularly afterward, and especially when I started caring for my mother, I really noticed that collaboration was critical. But as you pointed out, Molly, each relationship was so different. And then it would be different with between individuals or groups of individuals, would be different within the parameters of the project, and then also the side that other people were bringing. If it was strongly, like, say, um, they were looking at patenting a new way to make fiber, there would always be that side of it coming from them. Whereas when I worked with the doctor and his team, it was very much more about compassion and empathy and so on, right? And I mean, there was a commercial aspect, but that was sort of minimal. And then we got into the crisis modality of not knowing what was happening, free fall, and we're just thinking, could this be useful information in terms of protecting people?
Mhm.
But the collaborative parts have made me grow almost like a whole other degree, you know. It's like that would be another whole school of learning. And to fall away from that sort of like really fall away from that idea of like, okay, what we're all doing, we are all just one thing. We are one entity on this swirling ball of water, and lots of beauty and lots of not beauty. But and then we just, as Pedro was saying too, we fall into these silos through an illusion, which I'm trapped in myself. But that paradox, or that navigation, added this whole other aspect to my thinking and making, that I think brought me to my wanting to do a doctoral degree, right? Where it really is that idea of like, well, what is it like if the material wants to be designed into something? Not me, like, am I just the hands that plastic wants to be helped to become the next thing it meant to be? And sort of, I know that's a very esoteric place to go with that, but really learned to collaborate with the material, which, that's not a new thought, but it's great, like the vibrant matter kind of concept of materiality. But also now I'm thinking about, is craft a consciousness that that it's like there's many people who support this kind of thinking around things like the sun, where it doesn't have a brain, but there are many things that don't have brains, like mushrooms, and they have these, or mycelial networks and so on. So what is it like when we start to collaborate with things that we might want to, in a very simple way, say, like, are alien to our way of thinking as mammals with hands and eyes and brains and so on?
Well, I think that's a very interesting moment to be talking about like technology here too, right? If we're talking about like non-human collaborators, we're talking about that can be sort of like the technology of textiles or the technology of plastics and electronics and this kind of like more like
Yeah.
broad in scope of technology. Um, and I think that you're right. I think that these are also collaborators in these projects, and they are also sort of uh, have that we are maybe not kind of able to like mold them in the or bend them to our will. They are a participant perhaps in the making and like larger ideas of these projects. So I think that's a very interesting.
Yeah, and I think to just elaborate on your point, I think we are as humans, one of our greatest mistakes is we feel we are manipulating the material. We never stop
Exactly.
to think how it's manipulating us, and which is kind of cool. It knocks us down some pegs, but it also kind of forgives us sometimes, or we could use it as that, right? To go,
Yeah.
maybe it isn't my fault that I'm doing this, consumption thing. Maybe I've been just evolved to do that. Now, how do I address that? Knowing that.
Well, I think too, like for Pedro, I want to turn to you now and say how this sort of reflects on the idea of autoethnography, which is something I work in as well in the field of feminist and gender and women's studies. Um, and this, yeah, like have the moment of understanding that your experience is a sort of viable place of study and uh, creation and what that felt like for you. Like, what did it feel like? We're talking about collaboration. Sorry, I'm going all over the place. In talking about collaboration, we can also talk about the moment of like understanding that you could look inward, perhaps, and like what was it like to both work collaboratively with um, folks who are working in the technological spheres, with other people who are experiencing sensory needs in this project, and also yourself. And what was it like to open up um, the project to these many players and also to yourself? That's a very long question. I'm sorry.
Yes. Well, I think the first step and the first collaboration was with myself,
Yeah.
actually, to realize that, like as Gary said, like it's a cliche, but it's true. It's not okay. But we often come into design and arts believing that we're going to be famous, right? That we're going to be pop stars and we're going to be, or at least that's what I thought and that's what I wanted. So as you study and grow and work in the industry, you realize that, well, it's not how it works. And it's not how it works. And it's not going to be easy if I want to do all by myself. So collaboration is essential in our fields. Like for that reason, and also for all that it's going on right now, like we cannot just work independently and then have like, for me, they just turn into occurrences, like just ideas in the air, and then it just actually doesn't make something. So collaboration, I think early stages from my undergrad even was always there. It's never been something that I'm afraid of. I actually search for it a lot, and some people sometimes freak out because it's like, why do you want to share that much, or why you ask that much, or why are you like that friendly or curious? And it's like, oh, it's how I do things, and that's how I make them work. So yes, first was collaboration with myself, acceptance, reconciliation, and I think the biggest takeaway of collaboration wasn't during my degrees. It was after my degrees. Um, and it was understanding that we are humans. Like no matter who are you speaking to, if it's a scientist, a lawyer, a designer, whoever, they're like, we're humans. And if you don't make the other person you're talking to or trying to engage with feel human, nothing is gonna out there. Nothing good. Like you're not gonna get the right answers. You're not gonna get answers, at least. And if you get a negative answer, that's also good too. That's also human. And probably you don't want to be working with that person, so it's a win at the end. So collaboration, it's essential. It's always been there. but I think collaboration has to be in the first place or approach in a human way, like you and I are talking right
Yeah. And it sounds like, I mean, we're talking about compassion in these projects because I think it is a route to compassion being like the route to a lot of this work, and sort of seeing need and wanting to create solutions or create ways of easing those uh stresses on the body. But it also was like of coming from a very vulnerable place, because I think when you acknowledge the like vulnerability of the body, you're kind of also speaking from a vulnerable place yourself, and to turn to autoethnography is very vulnerable. So yeah, how do we as artists, uh, and thinking about the body, think about our own vulnerability and those of the vulnerability of the people that we're kind of working with and the bodies that we're trying to help, I guess. I'm rambling today. I'm sorry. There's just, there's so many delicious things to talk about today. Okay, I will take a quick pivot. We're talking about projects that some have sort of ended recently, like Gary with your projects around uh COVID, and Pedro, your master's project was just in 2023 and you're kind of still working on a lot of it. But I wanted to ask both of you about sort of like the next iterations of projects that you're working on, or kind of directions that you're going. Are you still thinking about the intersections of fashion, technology, and the body, access, and health? Uh, yeah, Gary, what do you think we're working towards? What are you thinking about these days in your
Yeah.
doctoral
So,
research?
so yeah, when I knew that I knew that I wanted to step back from the sort of the more applied medical
Mhm.
aspects, for sure, because I was feeling very empty, and also that we were the part that textiles and fashion and myself and other people involved from our end, from NASCAD's end, like the students who were working on research and so on, that we were being maybe used a bit for that skill, and then sort of then dismissed. So sometimes I think we had some very innovative ideas that were just, not being absorbed. More so with the sort of the fiber innovative people, and not maybe so much with the medical people who maybe had more of that sense of like the importance of other voices, in a broader sense of empathy. Less commercial as well. But anyhow, that step back coincided with this thought that I'd had since childhood about what is this thing that's with me when I'm being creative. And it was almost like I had this friend, like this invisible friend. But it was inside me, not like someone I could see or anything. And that's where I got this idea of like, do we make craft or does craft make us? And all of those different thoughts, like from just how do I get inspired to try something that I don't, as a child, I didn't know how to do, but I would just do it and play with it and figure it out by doing it, as opposed to like, I wasn't a kid who would go get a book out of the library to learn how to do macrame, for example, right? I would just fiddle around and maybe, then people would jump in and help or so on. But um, I learned through my hands and so on better. And then so so I got, accepted to do this degree, and it was based on, thoughts of kind of what is craft as you know, a relational thing, like a vessel and a technology seed that gets, can be put into the future. So there's all sorts of layers. But what I wanted to do was see if I could connect with this idea of craft intelligence through letting go of my authority or my, you know, primacy as a creator, and see what it was like to then more fully negotiate between entities. And I thought some of the measures that I would use would be a shift in my aesthetic. So anyhow, that kind of happened. But one, has to also ask, was that a fictional act that I then narrated for myself? And maybe it's okay, either way. But what happened was I started just following. I took this a simple process that I use in teaching, which is finger knitting. And I don't know if people know it, but it's really absurd and kind of boring, and it's taught to kids because it basically preoccupies them and makes them quiet. Uh, but but anyhow, from that process, I found that there was something happening, and then it was like, well, what could this be? Right? What does this describe to me? So I started extending the fingers here into doweling in a board, right? Which is not innovative in itself, but it was the way I came to that innovation that was interesting to me because I let that process describe it and then made it on an impulse. And so then something else started to happen. Then the material starts to get more interesting because it ceases to be kind of a tube that rolls on itself and it becomes more like a larger sheet of material.
Mhm.
And then I just was, innovating with, I don't know why, I just started using plastic bags, slicing them up and making this sort of plastic yarn. I mean, it was available, it was inexpensive, it's very colorful. Um, Somehow plastic was really just speaking to me. And then that just grew into larger devices still made out of wood. So that technology is sort of very, very basic, but really interesting. And these things also exist. And I knew that. I was like, this has to be a thing in the world. It turns out it is like knitting, I think they call them knitting circles or something.
Mm.
But it's basically based on that thing of like, the sort of it's a spool with four nails and then
Yeah, corking, I've heard it called too.
corking. That's it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
corking.
I would do that
So
as a
I,
kid.
yeah, and I just made a device like that on a out of a yogurt container, and then I
Mhm.
took that and put it back into wood and made it large, and that's what I've been doing is large scale knitting, which or could be called sockinette, I guess, but and then taking that material and then just exploring it in terms of public installation,
Mhm.
usually at the sort of the sort of in the liminal space of between land and sea, and then using it as also costuming and making second skins, and using the Selkie
Mhm.
narrative of the seal skin and the human as a poetic starting off point. So that's where I'm working now. Those are the last project I just finished, and the next two that will be dealing with that same thought, and then applying to my degree. Very
Okay,
long way to
great.
get there. Okay.
And again, the technology kind of following the body, right? Moving from the fingers to the technology of the loom is very interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks, Gary. Okay, Pedro, same question to you. What is sort of the future of this project, or what are the intersections of fashion and technology and health that you're kind of continuing to look to in your work?
Yes, so same as Gary, like I've been now like very fresh introduced into this scientific medical realm. It's pretty new for me, but obviously I have to be exposed by the nature of my because of the nature of my project. Um, however, same. Like I don't think um we're collaborating in balance when we do these kind of collaborations.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's fortunate that a lot of these disciplines are taking actually our methodologies and research to develop their own research or products or whatever they're doing. However, it's being implemented and taught by themselves, which ends up in a retrofit. For example, I attended to this interdisciplinary research conference in Dalhousie for health students. And one of the first chats was about universal design. None of the panelists were designers or artists. And then, yes, of course, when you heard the talk, you realize that universal design it wasn't applicable. Like it's obsolete, right?
Mhm.
So we fall into those things in what they call retrofits, and then the innovation becomes more a check, like a check mark to comply with the new policy of the company
Mhm.
instead of actually being human centered. And I think yes, while sometimes it can be hurtful, be treated like that, especially when we're contributing that much to their fields, I think it's essential to at least be present where all these things are being conceived. Um, as far as where I want to go, I think I mentioned a little bit. I'm currently in these accelerators, hubs, DAO mostly,
Mhm.
trying to get this into an actual garment. And the goal is like, yes, my dream is to make an accessible clothing line, not just for neurodivergent people, but for any disability to my possibilities. Obviously, I'm not going to change the world right away, but yeah. And how I envision after I do this, I really want to look forward into biomimic design. I'm very fascinated on how animals use their skin also to communicate and exchange information from their environment and with the other animals per se. So yes, I'm very interested on looking at all these natural processes that actually sometimes we ignore, and they can end up being super innovative for our current situation, living, you call health, you call it. So yes, I'd love to explore more into biomimic design
Mm.
and integrate it into clothing. I was talking about this with Gary. The octopus just fascinates me in how it's able to communicate almost anything that they need to communicate without any words. They don't use words, and yet they can communicate to us and to the other animals what are they doing, or what is that they want, or what is that, or if they're gonna hunt you, or they're stressed, or they're pissed, or I don't know, you name it. So yeah, that would be the next step, hopefully. And hopefully it's not very speculative at this point, but also that's the way I design. So
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, I always have more questions, but I want to give the audience a chance to ask some of their own. So we're going to turn it over to the guests today. And if you have any questions for Pedro and for Gary, please turn your camera on or post in the chat, and I'll read them out. Oh, hi, Ariane. Okay. Ariane says she's at work and has to leave the meeting, but would have loved to talk more about working with medical professionals and about producing prototypes for the field of geriatrics. She says she's currently assisting Dr. Rockwood. Um, yeah, and then she's put some things for you to look at in the chat, so I recommend that. But do you have both of you have any insights or recommendations for working with medical professionals and creating these prototypes that you've been using in your projects?
I think that, I've worked with Dr. Rockwood. He was the advisor to the student that I was working with. So I think you're in great hands there. I think he's one of the few people that I met who has that breadth of thinking, that he's not biased in the same way that I think other people are. So I don't really have any other advice other than follow your intuition with people, and really, Pedro, you probably can speak to that better in terms of like how you're treated, and how to maybe use that as the barometer, you know?
yeah, I would say, and this was told to me by one of the coaches of the entrepreneur uh, cohorts I've been attending, and it's true. At the end, people is gonna remember you or engage with you depending on how you make them feel. So again, don't forget like that other person is human. And again, like just be yourself. Like if that person continues to say no, then like why do you want to work with that person? You know what I mean? Like just go and look to another one. And there's gonna be someone who, and now I'm gonna sound like Lady Gaga, There's 100 people in the room. You just need one to believe in you. So that's it. Like you're gonna find that person who believes in, like, who's gonna propel you, support you, and hopefully get to do big things together. But yeah, just be yourself. I would say that. Be human.
Just maybe one final question for today. Not dissimilar to what Ariane is asking, but I always like to ask our guests um, advice or like passing on of knowledge to NASCAD students who might be interested in pursuing this kind of work. So if you had a student who came to you and was interested in working in the same kinds of fields and projects that you're exploring, do you have any advice for them? Whoever would like to go first, you
Well,
guys can.
I'll go first.
Sure. Thanks,
And
Gary.
this is something that I learned was when I started to feel like those projects I was involved with were not making, like, I didn't feel I was giving them the respect they deserved.
Mhm.
And it wasn't based on other people, even how I was being treated. It was just in myself. I was like, oh, there's something I'm really meant to do. And I used it as a way, a tunnel, or, like as a tool to get to something that was like the mother lode of what I really want to do. And then that is the idea of like getting to that point where it is a passion for you. Like, and that sustains you. But it doesn't, it ebbs and flows still, but I can go back and I can feed myself some of that nutrition and then I'm back. So really follow your passion. And it sounds so cliche, but it really is, it's really important.
No, I think it makes sense to me. Even again, I'm gonna go to the entrepreneurial cohorts. Like if they've been, that's what they tell you. And like we often think it's just like an artistic thing, and we all convey the same thing of emotion and like passion and like purpose. But they see it in the market entrepreneur world too, and it's that like always ask your purpose, your why, and your why is gonna like allow you to pivot when you don't when you're not in the solution that you envisioned, right? So for example, my purpose is to be empathetic with people,
Mhm.
right, with this project, whether it's through textiles, whether it's going to be with something else I design, a system, an object, an event, anything. But that purpose, that being empathetic, it's what it's gonna allow me to navigate. So it doesn't matter like what you the outcome. It's just your purpose. Be sure that what you're going to invest your time, actually you're passionate about it, because that's
Yeah.
going to allow you to pivot at some point. And then don't be afraid, because again, like you don't know how many no's I've heard, even from like people you think never is going to say no. So you just need yourself and someone else. And that someone else can be, it doesn't have to be person too. It can be your faith. It can be what you believe on, right? You just
Or
need
Lady Gaga.
or Lady Gaga or Lady Gaga. Hayden, I'm a little monster myself, so
Pause up. That's wonderful advice, both of you. Thank you. That's really good to think about how to, yeah, how to ground yourself and how to kind of maintain um like authenticity and interest and engagement in the project. So thank you both so much. It's been wonderful to talk with you. And if you enjoyed this talk, come and see us next month in May for our next artwork. And yeah, big thank you to Pedro and Gary. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
thanks to
Great
you.
questions. Fun to be with you all. Okay.
Thanks, guys. Have a great
Bye-bye.
day.
You too.
Bye.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye.